Poison Ivy issue 25, G. Willow Wilson and Marcio Takara. Is this a little oversized because it's issue 25?
Yes. So there's numerous artists. So I'll break it down in stories because it's done in like a bookend that's done by Takara and Wilson, and then there's 1, 2, 3. There's 4 other stories that are told throughout. So yeah. So the first part of the bookend is essentially the next day at Slaughter Swamp after the plant zombies and after Pam defeated Floronic Man, and everyone's kind of getting up and around in the swamp house. Croc says that he doesn't get up before 9 until he ends up taking an entire pot of coffee from Janet from HR and chugging it. And then Harley shows up with a bunch of gardening equipment as kind of a make nice for Pam. And they all talk about Pam sends them off kind of on these little missions. Ivy has heard like rumblings through the green that there's that town that had showed up in issue 15. So she sends Croc to go investigate it in the swamp. And then she sends Janet into town to kind of find out on what Gotham's saying about this last thing. Like, is there any residual effects left over from the zombie infestation? And yeah, so that's where the bookend part 1 stops. And then it picks up on a story called Beneath the Surface by, let me zoom in, Joanne Starrer and Heining, the artist. And it's essentially a Batman story told about his first, or not his first, but one of his early interactions with Ivy. And you never really get a good look at Ivy because she hits him with hallucinogens. And so you end up seeing these kind of monstrous versions of her, vine creature, her mouth's all big and gaping like a Venus flytrap. And we get the stupid pearls. I hate seeing the pearls, but of course you have to, he's going into his trauma. And we end up, seeing that his mom reaching out to him and his fond memories. And then that gets broken with a gunshot and the broken pearls. And Heining's art's really good here because it's very chaotic. So it feels a lot like when Heining was doing those zombie issues where Pam was transforming more into the monstrous version of herself. So there's a bit of continuity from the series to there. The art really showcases everything in here because it's essentially Batman saying that none of this is real, reminding himself. And in these early run-ins with Pam, he had always noticed before she shows up, it would get like this smell of earth and like flowers, but more importantly, roses. He doesn't know if that's like the memory of his mom as the roses, or if that's just Pam and how she goes. But it also reminds him of freshly dug up earth. And so it sends him into this kind of spiral. And, every time he gets done dealing with Ivy, he's always alone. And that's the worst part, right? That he gets into this part where he sees his parents, they're still gone. And then Pam's gone as well, leaving him with the scent of roses and wet earth. So that story, that was fine. Again, I never need to see the pearls break and fall ever again, But, the art here, Heining, it's really, really good at transitioning from the hallucinogens to the more straight storytelling. And then we get the story of these 2 cousins. I'm trying to find the title page for this one. This is called The Mushroom Hunters, and it's by Grace Ellis with art by Brian Level. And it's these 2 cousins that one of them works at a university studying climate science, and the other one comes to his house to check on him because Grandma sent him, because they haven't heard from him. He's kind of living off the grid in Wyoming, right off the highway that Pam had driven through on her way to Seattle. And Grandma was worried about him because the one cousin that's studying climate science is kind of just kept to himself up there. But the second cousin ends up bringing these mushrooms that he found at a farm that, as soon as he was leaving, the police showed up, and they are the lamia spores that Ivy was dosing everybody with. So they end up taking these mushrooms, they end up tripping, um, and they end up trying to basically they start trying to find more of these mushrooms. And everywhere they stop is a place that we saw Ivy stop. Um, that eventually leads them to have a run in with Ivy in Montana. They finally caught up with her, and she essentially ends up hitting them with a super dose and pushing them away. But before she can get away from them, though, the one cousin that was studying climate science has completely gone mad from the spores, and he ends up biting a big chunk of them off of Ivy's arm, and so they end up getting consumed by the Lamia spores in Montana, where Ivy just leaves them. And that one was out of all of these so far, that was my least favorite, just because of it's very, let's just follow these guys as they're tripping, and to try to figure out, they don't know what Ivy's doing, but we do. So there is a sense of dread throughout. It's just kind of, if I had to cut one, that would have been the one. Then we get to possibly my favorite, and it's Killer Croc. It's called Boots and Handbags by Gretchen Felker Martin and Adagun Ilan. And it's Croc looking for this city that keeps disappearing in and out of the swamp. And as he's looking around, a fan boat comes up, and he goes to hide, but it's too late. These hunters see him, and they go to shoot him, which leads Croc to getting really upset. And he ends up killing one of the guys and coming back to eat the other. So they end up throwing dynamite at him. That doesn't work. He quips that they're going to need a bigger boat, which I really appreciated. And before he can kill the second one, he ends up looking over as he's chasing him through the swamp, and he sees the city. And he starts to wonder if this little town or city is where these guys are coming from. Because he's been all over the swamp. He's never seen it before. He's never seen these guys. Usually people don't make it this far back into the swamp. And so he leaves the dead body there, even though he threatened to eat him, as the swamp water starts to rise up over. The art here is done really well, with the exception of the proportions on Croc. They make him like we already know Croc's a big dude. They make him like almost Bane or like Hulk level size. Like his traps are huge. And it's kind of grotesque as it goes. Everybody else, it's got to be a stylistic choice, because the two other guys that are hunting him are basically regular proportions. But the breakdowns are really well handled. And the background art, there's because it's kind of almost sunset but not quite. It's done in like purples and reds in the sky, and it just gives it a really foreboding kind of vibe to the whole story. So yeah, that's probably my favorite, just because of what it did with Croc. It was an excuse to give him an action scene. And this might be the actual most important story. This is done by Dan Waters with art by Danny. And it's called The Pyrophyte. And it follows this guy that is tracing Ivy through Gotham City. He's seeing these hints of green pop up, and it looks like he's almost communing with it. And we're getting his like inner monologue, where he talks about how he had seen this tree, growing where it shouldn't have, in Gotham, and that's how he knows he's in the right spot. And the Gotham police are looking for this guy because turns out he's former MI5 from England, and he's gone rogue. And he ends up staring at this lodgepole pine in front of this big building that houses a oil company in Gotham, and he has planted explosives all over this courtyard. And he etches into this bench that he's sitting there, Green Knight, and uh, his inner monologue is going on that he's trying to prove himself. He keeps trying to communicate with her, and he just keeps saying her, and he just keeps calling her Ivy. That he's going to prove himself. He's going to show her that he's worthy. And so he's essentially going to blow up this lodgepole pine because it's a type of tree that has a very thick bark, and it only reproduces through fire. Right, so you have redwoods that do this. The fire gets around the tree so much that it finally releases its seeds and cones, and it's able to reproduce in the ashes of the old tree. And so he's going to blow this tree up to spread more of them across Gotham to show Ivy that they're on the same side. Except Gotham police realize what he's doing, and they find 2 of his bombs first, but they don't get to him before he can set off the 3rd bomb. So one of the police officers shoots him, hits him in the back, but he makes it to the bomb, blows up the tree, and we see the seeds kind of spread out through this courtyard. And as he looks up, he's on fire. Danny's art here is fantastic, with the way that it handles the explosion and the cones. But as he's on fire, he looks up and he sees Ivy coming out of the fire, but it's not the Ivy that we've known through these last 25 issues. It's more of her in her traditional form, like kind of her first appearance that Batman saw her in like the light green dress with the headband of Ivy. But it's this police officer, but he looks up at her and says, I did it all for you because I love you, Ivy. And it ends with him, dying in front of this burned out tree. Again, the art here is fantastic. The way that Danny builds the tension with Waters here, where we can kind of see where this guy is because he's wearing a red hat throughout. But once the police get to the courtyard, you lose him a couple times, up until up until where the sniper finds him and ends up shooting him through the back. But yeah, I feel like this is kind of hinting where we're going to be going with Ivy now. It seems like there's a group or a cult that is popping up about her, and it's strong enough that it got this former, so the MI5 over there is like what, CIA? Pete?
I mean,
like, is it an international type group?
I can never remember like which ones like MI5 and MI6. They're 2
Gotcha.
different things, and
Well, whatever he was a special forces operation guy, and it seems like he's gone. Whatever he was investigating, he thinks he can commune with the Green, and he was seeing Ivy. So it seems like this is something that's seeding for later. But if Wilson's rounding up her run, I wouldn't mind seeing Waters working here, because the way that this story was handled with just the hint of Ivy, fantastic. And then this leads us to the bookend of it's the end of that night. Harley and Ivy have spent their time cleaning up what's left of the zombies from the mushrooms, and they're throwing them into the swamp to kind of compost, right? And Harley wonders if they're gonna need to, use fire, and Pam's like, no, because some plants are activated like fire, like the pine from the last story. But, these are pretty delicate, even though it spreads easy. So I think we're doing the right thing. Janet comes in and tells Pam basically what she had saw, that there was a terrorist group in Gotham that had set off a bomb near an oil building. And then as she's explaining that, Croc comes up, and he's all beat up from his fight. And he lets everybody know that, he'll tell them later. And it ends with Janet, Harley, Ivy, and Croc walking into the sunset, saying that she'll make it, thanks for standing by her. She'll make it up to him. And the final image is almost like a teaser.
Just before you go on,
Yes.
I did look it up. MI5 is domestic security, and MI6 is... Well, I don't know. I feel like they're both kind of like just different parts of, like... I think them combined make up what our equivalent to the CIA is, because it's more domestic counterintelligence and security as opposed to like
right.
policing, like FBI
Gotcha.
kind of does.
Okay.
And then MI6 is foreign intelligence. So
okay. So you put those together. Okay, so he was an MI5 agent, so he was domestic. So he definitely should not have been in the States, right? Unannounced. So him talking about him going rogue and all that. But yeah, so the final page is this really beautiful image done by Takara that is a tease for what's coming up in the rest of 2024 and beyond. And it's got the gardener in Croc on the upper left. It's got, and I always forget his name, the guy with the flower head from a couple issues before. He also showed up to help. Swamp Thing and what looks like the Parliament of Trees. And then this group with everything on fire behind them, they're all wearing masks. But there's like this kind of green leaf with a chevron image behind them. So I'm wondering if this is that terrorist group they were talking about, or the cult kind of that's rising up around Ivy. And then, of course, the little town, village, whatever it is, in Slaughter Swamp that keeps popping up and shifting. With it, in Dead Center, not Dead Center, but off to the center is Ivy and her kind of newer get up. It's not the full plant version, but it's also not her traditional green dress version. But yeah, kind of not quite a mixed bag of stories, but there's only one that I kind of didn't dig as much. But yeah, a pretty nice 25th issue to go off that kind of it plays with where we've been, but now also where we're going. And I like that Wilson had allowed other writers to kind of pick up the ball in different spots. So very, very curious to see what's going on with the Dan Waters story going forward. Really looking forward to it. Still enjoy this book. And the art, I gotta say, I like more of it than I didn't. So I'm gonna give this a solid 8.